welcome to our second episode of Making History. This week we are really lucky to have Gabriel Diaz with us. He works at the Escondido Library. Gabe, can you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do at the library?
Thanks so much, Anitra. I do the digital services at the Escondido Public Library, which is kind of a fancy way of just saying that I'm responsible for anything that's computer tech-based, implementation of on-site machines and technology, and then as well as some STEM learning.
So the reason we have you on today is because you have an amazing 3D printing initiative going on right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what the library is doing 3D printing-wise, please?
Certainly. So when the outbreak first originally happened, we were trying to look for ways that we could utilize our 3D printer to assist the public. We had had them open prior to the public for basic learning about 3D printing and CAD, and so since it was closed, how do we keep helping out? We looked around and found that some of the San Diego County libraries were printing out face shields, as those were kind of the safest middle ground since it's harder to form a regular face mask. So we followed their printouts and started printing them. The only problem I faced was, who do I get them to? Eventually I was able to connect with a group where we were able to start sending our prints out to them.
So how did you decide who gets them and where they went?
So that was actually a nice luxury of joining this group, which unfortunately doesn't have a name, but it was a larger conglomerate of people out in Hemet, San Jacinto, Moreno Valley, that area. They were reaching out to various healthcares that weren't receiving them, primarily elderly care and like dental or first point of contact, but wasn't necessarily immediately essential workers that had maybe received like 3 face shields for a staff of 100. So it was a very easy process to say, oh, okay, I can print out 10 to 15 in a day. Let me hand them out to these people. They then would be the process of being disinfected, sanitized, and stored, and then shipped out to them.
Did you only decide to go ahead and do the visors, or did you print anything else?
I did attempt to make face shields. Unfortunately, some of the earlier designs were a flat plane that you then had to kind of use like a hairdryer or a heat to sort of mold into a shape for the face. Problem with that is you want to have a vacuum seal or something that's a little closer to the mouth. You can't really do that for people you don't know, haven't met, and you can't really form it to their own face. There are a couple now, I will say, that can do it a little more easily. They're more generalized. But at the beginning, it was just trying to figure out what can we do. We looked as well at ear savers, which are holders that go to the back of the head for masks to help them not rub on the ears as much.
And what are you printing today?
We have been printing out face shields. I think I've crested into the over 250 face shields that I've printed out. I switched over to the UC San Francisco design, which was a little smaller and had a smaller size to it and printed out a little bit faster. That allows me to reach kind of that 12 to 15 each day.
What were you using before that?
Prior to that, I was using I don't know the exact who designed it. It was from the San Diego was using this one. We saw it from a post on the news about them running it. So I pulled the file and started printing with that one.
What about ear savers? Where did you get your files for the ear savers? Same place?
Correct. I actually researched a little bit on Thingiverse, which is a kind of well-known website for 3D print designs. Looking around for examples that were already printed there, mostly just to make sure that I could utilize the printer that I have to its fullest capabilities.
What kind of printer are you using right now?
So at the library, we have 2 TAS6 by Lulzbot. These are larger, kind of more expensive machines than your average entry level. They have a heated print bed and they do print in 2.85 millimeter. So they have certain specifications that you run into and need to make sure you're aware of when you start printing.
Do you only utilize ones at work, or do you have some at home as well?
I'm actually in the process of looking to pick up one for myself. I'm looking at maybe some of the more entry level ones that are a little more in my price range. Which for the most part, I will say for people that 3D printers you can get for under $200 that are absolutely fantastic. The bigger one just comes with bells and whistles that help if you're more of a corporation, things like auto leveling, heated print beds, that sort of approach.
Are there any brands that you're looking at maybe for getting for your own personal home use?
Yeah, there's a Creality or Creatality, I'm not 100% sure on the name, and then also Maker Forge. Dremel also makes some amazing 3D printers, but those are, again, kind of in the more cost prohibitive range. But if you're looking for something that you can really put as a workforce, that's kind of the route I look at.
What about filament? What kind of filaments are you using?
So actually, it's interesting. I was going to mention to you, I use PLA at the library, and I find that most public institutes will lean towards PLA. It's a corn oil-based plastic. It's polylactic acid. Basically, it just means that it's starch that is put into the plastic. Low toxicity, you don't really need venting. It's pretty easy to work with. I like it a lot to print out. Most public places do as well. The other thing that came up recently was I reached out to a company, so I'm gonna give them a small push here, called Overture 3D. I simply sent an email of just, I had been using their filament that I had received off of Amazon. It's just a good price. And I had had some of the best adhesion with it that I could have asked for. So I knew if I put a print in, it was going to print successfully. I reached out to them via email just to say, hey, you know what? I want to tell you guys, thank you so much. Like, I'm really glad that your filament is doing a good job for us. Maybe you can pass it on to people in your department or whatever, just that like, hey, thank you. They responded back by sending me 50 spools of PETG filament.
Awesome.
Which is an insane gift to get. And the funny thing is PETG is a type of filament that is a little sturdier than PLA. It can be a little finicky to print with, but if you get it down, it can make for visors that are going to be way more resistant to heat. So no one has to worry about accidentally leaving it in the car, or if they're working outside or doing food handouts at the schools, that sort of thing. So it was just an incredible process to receive all that and be able to utilize it.
Gabe, you seem really knowledgeable about all the different kinds of 3D printers out there and the different kinds of filament. How did you actually get into 3D printing?
So it's funny. I appreciate you saying that, for one thing. It's kind of an ad hoc, learn as I go process. I've been in libraries for 15 some odd years now, give or take. And as I learned was all kind of picking up as you go. And when I eventually got out to the Carlsbad Library, they had started a maker space. They called it the Maker Hub. And they needed someone in there to kind of just run the printers and figure them out. But it was really nice. I was able to go in and just be told, figure this out. How does it work? Make sure it keeps working. If it breaks, make sure it's able to get fixed. And it really afforded me the opportunity to be like, oh, a nozzle got clogged. How do I fix this? The machine's not feeding correctly. What does this mean? What's a Bowden extruder? Like, learning every part of it as I go as a process of needing to figure it out was definitely within my wheelhouse of how I like to learn. So it panned out that way. What
were some challenges that you came across learning about 3D printing that you weren't expecting to have to face?
Some of it was things that maybe should have been obvious, but is kind of unique to kind of CAD design as well, which is because of it being a 3D printer, it's in a layer. So each stack has to go on top of itself. So you have to reapproach how building something might be. Can't print a T out because this is going to fall. So you have to start thinking like, well, can I print it sideways? Do I build support? What's the approach I want to take to fix things? And I really liked that. I also found that with 3D printers being kind of a nascent technology in some ways, it created a more enjoyable way of teaching people and learning myself. People came in and it was, hey, let's try this out. And if it breaks, that's great because we want to figure out how to fix it. So it was almost better every time we had a print that didn't work correctly. We had a filament that shot out in some direction, those kind of approaches. Yeah, it was probably that. And then also, I guess, to get kind of into the nitty gritty is just adhesion. Figuring out how to make sure your print stayed on the print bed so that you actually had a thing that was there and not a ball of spool was definitely a headache with a couple different printers.
I love hearing you talk about all these mistakes that you've made, and you look at mistakes in such a positive way as a learning experience. Because I think today, if we fail at something once, we get really discouraged and walk away from it, and we don't realize that we can learn. 3D printing is definitely a skill. It's not something that you just are born with, know how to do. You have to learn how to do it. And I think a lot of people think that they can just pick up a 3D printer, throw it in their home, and start printing out Pokemon. And that's not really how it is. And I would love for you to talk just a little bit on this idea of sort of demystifying 3D printing, because a lot of people who don't know how to 3D print and who have never touched a 3D printer, looked at a 3D printer in person, are like, oh, like I can just get one of those and I'll just, I'll make some dice, or I'll make a piece to fix the pipe in my bathroom. But that's not always the case. So if you can talk about that a little more, I'd love that.
Of course. I love the choice of the word demystified. That's very appropriate for the approach we like to take. I would say on a macro scale in library work, we are always trying to demystify things that otherwise seem barriers to people. It's the same reason you have a literacy department. You want people to not feel that they can't achieve something in front of them. Now, the same thing happens with 3D printing or any STEM learning in general, is it's a complex, interesting machine, but when you can break it down to its parts and explain to someone, we're just taking plastic and we're pushing it out of this thing to make an object. And okay, there's an understanding of a process. It's like explaining a computer as a brain. It's a way of learning how to communicate with people. And it allows us to also bridge certain gaps between ages. You have children and adults all of a sudden can be working on something that's not just one person's wheelhouse. It isn't something that's just for kids or just for adults. It allows a kind of cross communication. As you do that, it's the same thing as having a Word document. Eventually everyone knows how to make a Word file. You know, it's a learning skill set that we want everyone to have, because I very much think that 3D printing, or at least the fundamentals of 3D printing, will be involved in pretty much every job going forward.
A big part of our Making History initiative is trying to collect 3D printing misprints of PPE. One, because we don't want to take away usable PPE, but two, it's really interesting to see all of the different ways printing can go wrong. I know that you have some misprints for us today. I would love for you to talk a little bit about them and explain to us what went wrong with them.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll give you a quick example. So we saw, again, this is kind of what we want the final print to look like printed out. It's the part that holds the shield, that lays flat. That's the final object. Now, what we get a lot is little small issues. That'll be things like, you can see that bend, it's a lift. That's a print bed adhesion issue. That's something every 3D printer's gonna face all the time. We have a heated print bed on the Task 6s, so sometimes they just don't adhere quite right and they lift up, and then you can't really wear this because it's not gonna be comfortable on a head. That process can be fixed pretty easily. Sometimes you get issues where the nozzle decides to take the whole product and just sort of move it around and grab it and burn and warp everything. Also not fun. And the final one that I'll show you, because it's my personal favorite, is I had the issue of having a filament that was a little too slick. It was called a silk silver, and it didn't seem to actually catch on the grippers on the Derive. So I ended up with a print like this, which you can see it's this stringy mess on top that came apart. And what actually happened is, as it was printing, it no longer met the points to adhere, so it just started doing a triangle, and that was all the print that was getting made the whole way through.
It's almost like you can see the CAD drawing with all the different layers.
It very much looked like someone gave up drawing a blueprint halfway through.
We've mentioned CAD software a couple times, and I realize now that everyone may not know what that stands for. Can you please explain to us what CAD stands for and what CAD software is?
Of course. It's broadly accepted as computer-assisted design. It's kind of a catch-all in some degrees nowadays, because it's not always software, it's not always a program language. It can be kind of ubiquitous at times for what exactly it connects to. Sometimes it can be in reference to even G-code, which is a type of machine programming language. And that's the part that actually tells the 3D printer how to move and print. G-code is used in things like woodworking as well. That's what tells it just to go along and where to create each layer. But yeah, CAD software would be computer-assisted design most frequently.
Gabe, how much experience do you have using CAD software?
So I have maybe a couple years now, mostly under kind of simplified approaches like Tinkercad and Vectory. Those are free online software, well, I guess I should say browser-based learning experiences. Tinkercad is by Autodesk, and it allows you to build kind of with blocks. It has a bit of playing with Legos and whittling at the same time. Put a shape onto a field and then cut holes through it by taking shapes away. Vectory is a little bit more of an advanced approach to that. And then a lot of the time I'll end up actually using Kira, the Lulzbot version, which is they come as an install onto your computers if you're using the Lulzbot TAS 6s. That's an easy way for me to just do a quick edit. It's mostly just repositioning and things like that.
Gabe, how many face shields and ear savers do you think that you and the library have donated to date?
To date, we've done about a little over 250 face shields that we've provided to a number of institutions. We haven't switched over to ear savers just yet. That will kind of step in as the face shields become a little less needed as we kind of meet that peak. Right now, we're reaching out to a few more people out in the Escondido, Encinitas, San Marcos area that might have a need for face shields before we start transitioning over to ear savers. But yeah, about 250. Imagine I'll be cresting into 300 by the end of this week.
That is obviously a huge effort and a very generous effort. I'm curious, where is the financing coming for this generous gift that you're giving to the community?
So our filament was originally provided to us by some funding for supplies that we have in the library, but also a large amount of it came from the Friends of the Escondido Public Library. They're an institution that helps us by putting on programs, generating resources. They run our inside book store where you can purchase used books. Fantastic group of people who really value what the library can do to help out. So we had a pretty decent amount of filament left over that I was able to start pushing towards the face shields. Then it was pursuing, all right, I'm starting to burn through X amount of filament. I need to get a little bit more, ordering the process that way. And then reaching out and conversing with other companies such as Overture 3D and receiving donations from them of 50 spools to start assisting people, which minus a few mistakes should be about 2,000 some odd face shields I could print out.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When you initially started this project and trying to get the library on board to print things, I'm curious, was there any sort of pushback or any issues that you thought maybe might impede you from participating in this and starting this?
That's a very good question. We have a luxury at the library, and if I can step back a little bit to explain about the library as a whole, where we're giving a certain amount of onus to the tasks that we're assigned or in charge of, and are expected to do the best within our capabilities at it. And the oversight comes in, how can they support us through it? So as soon as this whole COVID-19 event happened, I talked with my direct supervisor, Dara Brads, and realized that there's a need for this. How can I assist? And rather than me, well, maybe this, maybe that, it was excellent. Go at it. Figure that out. Let me know what you need. So right away, I didn't have any pushback. It was just figuring out who needs them. Oddly enough, the hardest challenge I faced was finding the right people who needed face shields and were in need of what we could provide. It was not something I ever expected. Is when do you expect to be able to help someone and not know who to help?
A very interesting challenge. How did you get into communication with the group that you're a part of that's distributing what you print?
It actually happened through a close friend of mine who used to be a teacher of mine in high school. His name's Billy Valenzuela. His group that he works with was a conglomerate of various robotics clubs, after-school programs that happen to have access to 3D printers. Then he reached out to me saying, hey, don't you guys have a 3D printer? I was like, hey, we've been trying to make face shields. This is perfect. How can we help out? And then he actually also made about an hour drive to me once or twice a week to pick up shields as I was able to print them out. They were then taken and sanitized and stored so that they could be handed out to people that were doing after-school programs, lunch donations at the schools, manor care, elderly care centers, things like that.
Gabe, it sounds like the Escondido Library is doing some really fantastic work. Are there any other projects that either are or are not related to COVID going on right now that you would like to plug and tell us about?
Yes, actually, there's quite a few. We've been able to try out a few new things that have really been enjoyable to us. So we've done a lot of our story times and baby lap sits and other programs digitally, which has been great. I go in most days at the beginning of the day and start filming and work with people. And all of a sudden there's this sort of theater aspect that's happening that's really enjoyable. It's allowed me to kind of focus on a passion of mine, which is digital literacy. We talked a bit about demystifying. I very much like the idea of understanding the computer world around you as being just as valid as any other skill set you could pick up, and how people come to the library and maybe don't understand how a Word document works or how to get into their email. But half the time at Reference Desk, our job is to get them comfortable with that. And so that's just a form of literacy I think is actually very important. Beyond that, we have started doing some podcasts. We're two recorded at this point, and I'm editing them. We should be doing a third again soon. Our topic hasn't really been anything specific. It's been kind of an infotainment type approach, which is just, hey, let's talk about things we enjoy. We ended up on the name Nerds in a Third, because there's three of us, and at any one time, two of us are nerding out, and the other one's like, oh, that's interesting. Cool. So yeah, hopefully that'll be up on our website here pretty soon. We're doing some videos here and there. We're doing curbside pickup June 1st. Those kind of things that are projects I didn't originally get to think I'd do, and I've been having a blast with. And then finally, I would also like to mention that I am co-chair on the STEM ecosystem, which is actually being rebranded as the STEM Collaborative. What that essentially is anyone in the Escondido area, and they also have a broader for San Diego counties, of finding a way to meet, share resources, and communicate STEM-based learning. And that's from schools, libraries, museums, out-of-school programs, any source that wants to just help people understand more about STEM.
This has all been such a wonderful conversation, Gabe. Thank you so much for telling us more about not just your own experience 3D printing PPE, but just more about 3D printing in general and sort of demystifying the process. I think that's something everyone can really enjoy listening to. But it is time to get ready to sign off. At the end of every one of our episodes, we're going to ask our interviewees to suggest their number one podcast right now. It can be a plug for their own podcast. It can be about 3D printing. It can be about COVID. It can be about something nerdy, whatever you think that anyone out there watching should be listening to. Give us your recommendation.
I obviously have to plug my own podcast, Nerds in a Third. But as far as one that I personally enjoy listening to is Last Podcast on the Left. It's a kind of a left turn, I suppose, from what we've been talking about. It's more of a true crime, humorous podcast. I will add it is not for young or people who are sensitive to language that might be coarse. But if that's sort of in your wheelhouse, it's absolutely a wonderful way to listen and learn about true crime in a way that's still sort of humorous.
Well, Gabe Diaz, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed you demystifying 3D printing for us, and I think our audience will too. For those of you who want more information about the Escondido Library, they are linked to this video, but also check out library.escondido.org. Also, be sure to check out the very generous Overture 3D. They did not sponsor this ad at all. We are just very excited that they're out there doing great things, especially with the Escondido Library. Until next time, keep making history.